Okay, artists. So now that we've got the whipped cream done, let's try to tackle the cherry. The reason we're doing this second is, of course, because the whipped cream is so much lighter. You always want to work from light to dark. Getting your lighter objects down are super helpful in gauging just how much darker you need to get the values of those darker, deeper objects, okay? So I'm gonna start light, work to dark as always, even in this cherry. So I'm gonna grab my lightest pencil, an H, and I'm gonna just start filling in, avoiding maybe only the extreme highlights. Now, there's not many in this, but I'm seeing some highly reflective glares, which makes sense because this is plastic. Again, blending as I go. Let's build it up. Now, I want to make certain that my eyes are looking not only at all the values in the cherry and trying to spot where it gets lighter, darker, darkest, and really build that up. But I always also want my eyes to be constantly comparing the values of the cherry to the objects around it. How much darker is the cherry in its value scale? How much greater is the contrast, the difference between the darkest value in, say, the whipped cream and the darkest value in the cherry, or the lightest in the cherry and the lightest in the whipped cream. Now, I'm not seeing a lot of highlights. The lightest seems to even be, at best, kind of a faint gray. So I'm going to put that faint gray in there. That'll serve as my highlights. Okay, so let's start building up. Now I can, in my first pass, start applying just a little more pressure. I can only get so dark with this H pencil, so I'm going to bump it up to an HB. Recognize where it gets a little darker. Good gauge of how much darker I need to get this cherry too can be found in that whipped cream. Right where it meets the bottom, that base of the cherry, it's a very stark difference between those lightest peaks and that deep red, which we have to translate into a darker gray. Because it's such a marked difference from that dairy. Let's see here. The distorting darker shapes I see aren't like simple little circles or a cartoonish little rectangle like you'd expect to see on an apple. There's some really bizarre contortions and shapes in here, and I'm going to try to capture them all as best I can. Preserving some lighter areas, going in and blending. Okay, let's keep pushing it. I also have to be aware that while I'm getting much darker, I never want to like flirt with like pure black. There's nothing in the cherry that's pure black. But whatever I see in there, I do want to duplicate. And I'm even seeing the shape of that stem, that plastic stem, kind of distorted through this clear plastic. I'm going to capture that. Even if it seems unnatural or it seems uncherry-like, well, I'm going to try to duplicate as best I can. In this case, I'm working with a cherry, but it is a plastic, rather fake-looking cherry. Slight lip under there, that rim. It creates the width of that stem. Okay. If I overblend or I need to revisit with an eraser again to do a little cleanup, I can do that. Try to get some of those highlights a little brighter. And if I take out a little too much, I go back in and I just tighten up those highlights. If I blended so much too that I have a sort of like mist of graphite spreading outside of the shape, I can just go back in and clean up those edges. And just step back occasionally and see how you're doing, how it compares to the value scales around it. And then when you do that, it's important to recognize too if like, oh, you know what? now that I see them side by side, I actually feel like there are folds, crevices, peaks and valleys in my whipped cream that need to be darker when I sit beside that cherry. When I sit them beside each other, like, it's clear that by comparison, this does look a little darker here and there. And that's really important. Not only comparing objects in scale using size measuring, but also comparing their values so you can see if they stack up, if they relate to each other correctly. Okay? I can just slightly see the whipped cream through that cherry. The values aren't that drastic of a difference between one another though, so I'm gonna have to go back in and darken that up. And this is a decent jumping off point. I have a lot more to do yet. I might need to darken some areas, lighten others, try to refine it, clean it up, but I'm striving for as much value and detail as I possibly can, so keep pushing it till you've recreated everything you've seen. Remember, the goal is to duplicate rather than reinterpret. All right? Best of luck.